Okay, so we are now starting the live streaming. These talks will be recorded. So in addition to the people that we have in the room, we will be able to share these talks with a larger community afterwards. Welcome to GEC Talks. I am so delighted to be here today and welcome you back from lunch. I hope you all feel replenished and ready to focus your attention in getting some spiritual food for the next couple hours. It is such an honor for the organization to have these distinguished speakers today. We will have a series of 12-minute, powerful and inspirational talks that are really intended to spark a conversation that hopefully will continue through the remainder of the Congress. We're going to be talking about how to create breakthrough technologies and implement them. We'll be talking about how to start companies and scale them and replicate that process more than once. For investors in the room, we'll be discussing new trends in tech investing and how we can adapt to the new landscape of valuations, the new IPOs, and the new environment that we have for angel and VC investors. And if you're a startup, we'll also give you tips on how to raise funding from experts who have helped companies in the last decade to raise millions and millions of dollars. But also, we'll be talking about policies and how we can lower the barriers for entrepreneurs to start their companies in different ecosystems around the world, and how we can leverage creativity, mission, and purpose to create organizations that can be successful both in terms of profit making as well as in creating amazing social impact. Now, we have been talking about many of these issues for many years. I'm a member of the global board of GEN, and I know in every GEC we have covered many of these discussions before. So why is this so still relevant today? What is the meaning and the importance of us coming back to these issues once again this year? If you can start my slides in the back, can we start the slideshow? Great. I think what's really special about this time in history is that we are living in a pivotal time in the history of technological development and innovation in our world. Why? Because as you know, the pace of innovation and technological breakthrough has accelerated. And by many studies and reports, we know that in the next decade, we're going to be experiencing radical changes in the environment when it comes to trends and technological improvements that we'll be seeing around us. Some of that will have very drastic implications in our lives. For example, as many of you know, 800 million jobs will be affected by these new trends by 2030, according to the McKinsey Global Institute report. And we know that the context in which we create companies has now changed. In fact, not only for startups, but for individuals in our careers and our employability, but also for organizations and corporations, which now cannot expect to have an average age of 60 years in the Fortune 500 list. Today, that average age of those companies is 20. So we are experiencing new rules in this game, and that's why it's so important that we're going to revisit many of these topics with new perspectives from our very distinguished speakers who are the very world experts on these matters. So I believe that in thinking through the talks today, we will have 9 talks, we should keep in mind that one of the most important qualities and skills to develop as individuals and organizations is adaptability and also resilience. I think of it as the quality that enables transformer robots to adopt new permutations or conformations of their abilities and assets based on the circumstances. I think of it as creating diversity, not just within the organization where you can have different perspectives around the table, but also being able to create diversity within yourselves, where if you are in a domino game, instead of having just 2 tiles, you can present maybe more perspectives, more dimensions, and therefore have the ability to connect with many more different ecosystems and communities. And because I'm an investor and a VC, I think of this as managing a portfolio. Think of your identities and potential presentations of these confirmations as different investments that you have in your portfolio, where you can mitigate the risk of putting all your eggs into one career, one identity, and try to create that versatility for yourselves and around you. So one of the main key success criteria in this world is to lower the barriers for you to create innovation and to think different. And as we know, in any system, when you have something foreign come into the system, there is this reaction, resistance, the antibody effect, where new ideas tend to be killed by the system. So that's why we're going to talk about creating ecosystems that have, hopefully, zero resistance, and Victor Hwang is going to address the topic today. And with that, I would like to jump right into our talks, and we're going to go through multiple topics that will give us the whole range of perspectives on how to create innovation, to scale it and get investment and resources for it, and also the different versions and modalities of entrepreneurship that we can find in today's world. Okay, so with that, I'm so delighted to introduce you the first speaker of the series. Professor Robert Langer is here today. He's the MIT Koch Institute professor. I actually took one of his classes at MIT 20 years ago. He looks exactly the same. I have aged 20 years. And amongst his achievements, he has 1,400 articles, research articles that he has published, 1,300 issued and pending patents. He's the most cited engineer in history. And that, of course, has granted him 220 awards and 40 companies and over 300 companies that have used his inventions and innovation in different startups. So please help me welcome an accomplished scientist, but most importantly, a passionate and effective educator, Professor Langer, to stage.
Great. And is it I'm not sure, how do we, are the slides? I'll start while you're getting the slides ready then. Well, thank you so much. It's great to see you again, and really a pleasure to be speaking here, and especially amongst the number of MIT graduates as well. So, you know, I'm a professor, and of course the main thing I do is research in the lab with my students and also teach. But one of the things that's been personally very, very important to me is not just to write papers, but to see the work that we do really get out to the world and help people. And so I've gotten very involved in patenting things and also trying to use those patents to license them to companies, and in many cases to start companies, because unfortunately what I've realized is that you can write something, but that doesn't, a paper, but that doesn't mean somebody else will use it. So I thought I'd give you 2 examples of what we've done. The first one is kind of how I got started. I was actually a graduate student at MIT. I got my doctorate in 1974, and almost all my friends went into the oil industry, but I ended up doing something very different. I ended up going to Boston Children's Hospital and working in a surgery lab with a man named Judah Folkman. And one of the things that I had to work on, because we were trying to isolate what would be the first what are called angiogenesis inhibitors, substances that stop blood vessels from growing, that would eventually lead to drugs like Avastin and others that are some of the most widely used drugs in the world. But when we were trying to do this, one of the key things was to develop plastics that could deliver these molecules for a really long time, because it was hard to study blood vessel growth. So the challenge that we faced was, could you come up with a polymer or a plastic that could deliver a large molecule, like a protein, for a long time? So when we first tried to do that, this was just a little background, you know, well, one of the things I probably should have done was read the literature, but I didn't. And if you look at the literature, what you see on this first slide is it basically says you don't do that. It says the use of polymer matrices for slow-release systems has been virtually restricted to small molecules. So those would be molecules maybe 200 molecular weight or less. So I sometimes say the reason we were able to solve this problem is because I hadn't read the literature. So I actually spent those 2 years in the laboratory experimenting with different techniques, and I actually found about 200 different ways to get this to not work. And I kept trying and trying, but eventually I did find a way. It took me several years, and I was able to make little microspheres, like you see here, and one is here and one is cut in half. And we published in the journal Nature in 1976 the fact that you could use this approach to deliver large molecules for even over 100 days. We also were able to use this to isolate the first angiogenesis inhibitors. That would be published in Science in 1976. So I was a postdoc doing this work, and I was very excited about it. But what happened was I tried to write grants to see if I could get the work funded. But my first 9 grants, they were rejected, actually very badly. I still remember one of them that I sent to NIH. Somebody wrote, well, Dr. Langer, you know, he's an engineer. He knows nothing about biology and even less about oncology. Now, I knew enough about math to know that that was not possible, but still, it was very discouraging. So I wasn't getting grants, and then a lot of my friends said, you know, being a postdoc for your whole life is probably not a good idea. So I started to apply for faculty positions, and I'm a chemical engineer, so I applied to chemical engineering departments. And not a single department in the world would hire me. They said this bio stuff that I was doing doesn't make any sense. So I wasn't able to get a job in chemical engineering. I ended up getting a job in the nutrition department at MIT. And the reason I got that was because the head of the department, Nevin Scrumshaw, he was a very nice guy, to me at least, and he liked me, so he offered me a job. But he didn't bother to ask anybody else in the department what they thought. And that probably would have been okay, except the year after I joined the department, he left. And so the senior faculty decided to give me advice. And their advice is that I should leave too. So that was very discouraging. But, you know, I kept trying to keep at it and trying to keep working on this. And we would do different things. One of them was to try to get in vivo proof of principle in an animal that this would really work. And we showed Larry Brown, one of my students, made an aspirin-sized pellet, put it underneath the skin of a diabetic rat, and what you see on this slide is that you could lower the blood sugar from 400 to normal for over 100 days. And one of the things that, and this was part of what got me started, one of the things that Dr. Folkman said to me in the 1970s, you know, we were at Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard Medical School. It's a pretty good place, but you know they never had a patent. So we filed for the very first patent in the history of the hospital. And yet 5 years in a row, the patent examiner turned it down. He didn't, you know, in my opinion, understand it. But it didn't really matter. He was calling the shots. So the lawyer for the hospital came to see me one day, and he said, Bob, you got to just stop. He said, it's never going to get allowed. Patent examiner, you know, just, he's, you know, every time you go, he just turns you down. He said, just give up. But I don't like to give up. And I think that's part of what, you know, when people are entrepreneurs, you know, they don't want to give up. And so I started to think, how could I convince the patent examiner to allow this patent, legally, of course, and science wasn't working. So when we first started doing this, as people told me, as I mentioned earlier, that this couldn't work, that it was impossible. So I wondered, did anybody write that down? So now this is 1982, and you can do what's called a science citation search and look at the literature and see who wrote about what you did. And I did that. And I found actually a number of articles, but I'm just going to highlight one. This is from 5 of the top polymer chemists in the world. And they wrote, describing this field, as you can see, they wrote, generally the agent to be released is a relatively small molecule with a molecular weight no larger than a few hundred. One would not expect that macromolecules, for example, proteins, could be released by such a technique because of their extremely small permeation rates through polymers. However, Folkman and myself have reported some surprising, so that was a very good word for the patent examiner, have reported some surprising results that clearly demonstrate the opposite. So I showed that to the lawyer for the hospital, and he flew down to Washington to talk to the examiner. And the examiner said, gee, I had no idea. He said, I tell you what, I will allow this patent if Dr. Langer can get written affidavits from each of these 5 people that they really wrote that. So I was this young 27-year-old guy. I wrote each of them, and they were all nice enough to write me back that they really wrote it. And we got this incredibly broad patent. And with that, you know, we would teach different companies how to do this. We would license it. But most importantly, that didn't even take it far enough. I really wanted to see this get used. And Alex Klebanoff, one of my friends at MIT, said, Bob, we should start a company ourselves. And so we started this little company, Enzatech, with 4 of my students who were the first 4 employees, and they'd all spent a lot of their time in our lab making these microspheres. And then we did this merger with Alkermes, and today Alkermes, which has got a market cap of about $6 billion, and of course they've had lots of great people working there. It's really their accomplishment, not mine. But they have 25 products that are FDA approved or in clinical trials, and they've developed all kinds of new treatments for many diseases, like microspheres that treat schizophrenia, which affects millions of people, that treat alcoholism. It's also one of the leading methods right now of preventing opioid addiction, and it's also been used for type 2 diabetes. They have about 2,000 employees. So in the introduction was mentioned, about that we've got involved in about 40 companies. Almost all of them are medical, and they ranged from new drug delivery systems to new drugs, new diagnostics. Some of the newer things that we've been involved in are creating new drugs based on messenger RNA. For example, we started a company called Moderna, which had the largest IPO in history in biotech last December, and many others. And I'm very excited about them because they're hopefully saving and improving a lot of lives. But I wanted to give you one other example, just that's very, very different. And that is one day, one of the venture capital groups that I do a lot of work with, Polaris, one of my former students, Amir Nishat, works there, and he came to see me. He said, well, Bob, we want to start a hair care company. And I said, well, okay. And they said, well, we'd like you to help us. And so we started this company, Living Proof. And I said, well, what kind of problem do you want to solve? And he said, well, a lot of the hair people say we have this really big problem with people have frizzy hair. And so we started this company, like I say, Living Proof. Here's a little cartoon. And we started to look at the fundamentals of hair the same way we looked at the fundamentals of science and engineering and everything else. And what happens is, in the case of frizziness, is that there's probably 50 companies around the world, maybe more, that sell products to prevent frizzy hair. They all, interestingly, use the same ingredient, usually silicone. It's an oil to make, and they formulate it a little differently. So again, if you're a scientist, you go at the mechanism. What's the mechanism that causes frizz? Well, the problem is humidity. So our thinking is, well, you have to have a way to keep humidity out. So what you want to do is coat the hair with something that's very water repellent, what we call hydrophobic. Now, silicone is somewhat hydrophobic, but it actually doesn't really work that well. If you look at this graph and you look at the effect of humidity and the difference between silicone and, say, water, it's not very great. So we started to think, this was Dan Anderson and myself and others at the company, how could you come up with something that's super water resistant, super water repellent? I don't know if anybody has any ideas. Sometimes I ask to people to do a quiz, but let me try to give the answer. So a lot of people say you could use oil or Vaseline or this or that. Our thinking was you want the most water repellent thing we could think of was a Teflon frying pan. Now, of course, you're not going to probably put a Teflon frying pan in your hair, but you could look at the chemistry of that. And the chemistry is that it's a polyfluoroester. So we wondered, are there other polyfluoroesters that have actually been shown to be safe in humans? And we found that they are. They actually can be used to coat certain lenses and things like that. So we took that and we compared that to the silicone, and you could see this giant difference now. It actually works a lot better. And so we started, so there's a whole line of products that people can get at Sephora and other stores based on polyfluoroesters, and they're in shampoos and everything else. You know, I could tell you a lot of different things about them science-wise, but there was a very good TV show on this, and so I thought I would just show you that, and you can watch it, and they'll explain it much better than I do. I'm sorry. Is that not working? Can we get that video? Yeah, the video should be there. Is there a way to? It's not, it's worked, it's not, okay. Is it? Okay. Can we get the sound? Can we get the sound on it? I mean, I could narrate it, but now, does it stop or what's? Do we have it on your thing or? What should we? Should I?
You can either skip the video or continue. Maybe you can narrate it.
Well, if they can get it on, I'll narrate it without the sound.
Without sound, let's start it. So sorry.
No, that's okay. So anyhow, they start out and say, where else could you do this but MIT? And that's a picture of MIT. And that's me with a T-shirt on, explaining some of the science. And that's Dan Anderson, who's was my postdoc then, who's now a professor at MIT. That's my wall with different awards. And there's a reporter who's asking us questions. And then they're just showing things in the lab about how we do things. So you're seeing this pipette, and now they're talking about other things that have been invented in the lab, which have been all kinds of things, from new ways of making tissues and organs, like for spinal cord repair, and artificial pancreases, artificial hearts, and different things like that. And now they're going back to how we were starting to do things with hair. And there's a hairstylist, Mitch DeRosa, who's a good friend of mine. He actually, and so he's showing now the product. This is that people end up getting, and it's the no frizz product. And that's a guy, Rob Robillard, who was the CEO of the company. I don't think I've ever narrated this before. Anyhow, so he's talking about that people have tried for years, giant companies, to try to solve this problem. They never did. And then he talked about how our little group solved it, and in a second, they're going to show somebody who has frizzy hair. And well, actually, that they're doing that on dummy hair. But here's a woman, and they're showing this is what happens when she gets treated with a regular product, and yet this other side of her hair is what happens when she gets treated with the no frizz product. And that's Mitch explaining that it's miraculous. And then they're just showing, you know, things that are being done in the lab, and it's kind of like an assembly line, and how it coats the hair, and what they call the invention of the polyfluoroester, which is patented and owned by the company. So that's the polyfluoroester. And I guess that's a happy hair. And there's the product again. and she's styling the hair with it. And now they're coming back. This is the very end of it, thank God. And she asked me, well, do people kid me about it? And I just tell her a lot of people use it at MIT. So that actually ended up being a very successful product. And then they wanted, I asked what else would they like, and they said they wanted polymers that could make hair have more body. And Dan and I had a polymer library based out of poly-beta amino esters that we'd actually made with the idea of using them for gene therapy agents. But if you have patents on it, you have literally thousands of materials, and you could screen them, and you could find things that do almost anything. So we found one that worked really well on this. And that led to this product full. But what I was going to say is, like I say, we have about 39 companies that have been in the medicine, and usually what's critical there is if you have good clinical data and you have and you have FDA approval, that's really what carries a lot of weight. Here it was very different. At this company, we hired a woman, Grace Ray, who was a Harvard MBA, and she was the vice president of marketing, later became the CEO. And she did an analysis, and what she said is, you know, 95% of the people who have this, use the product like it, 90% who use it reuse it, and way less than 1% know it exists. So, but she and the people at the company were very smart, and they said, well, we should get somebody involved who the world will recognize, and they did. And here with me is this young woman. And so then the company did incredibly well. In fact, a couple of years ago, it was acquired at a huge multiple by Unilever, who markets it now. And then we also came up with a way, in the course of making the company, we came up with a cream that gets rid of wrinkles. And you can see the woman, one eye and the other, and it's really also amazing. We published this actually in Nature Materials because it was a very unique material. And Shiseido acquired this and is further developing it. So these are just examples of just two things that we did in the lab that led to different companies. There are many, many more. Harvard Business Review did a major article in 2017 on all the different companies, and you know, literally the hundreds of different products that are now out in the market based on this work, and the many students and postdocs who really did an amazing job to make this happen, and people at the company that really are responsible for getting all these products out to the world. So thank you very much. I apologize that the video didn't work. Thank you.
So now we know that in addition to all of his accomplishments, we can add improvisation and dealing with technical difficulties as part of his resume too. Thank you so much for that. We want samples. I think everybody in the audience wants samples of both products. I could use both of them. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Next, we have Mr. Raman Kumar, who's a serial entrepreneur and founder and chairman of Kashi India, which is a leading fintech company on lending for millennials. Mr. Kumar has started and sold billion-dollar companies, and he's now on track to do it again, which is a very rare accomplishment. And let's please welcome Mr. Kumar to the stage.
Rebecca, you're very kind. I only sold $1 billion company. It's a pleasure. But coming after the professor, I'm like the plebe in the Naval Academy. That's where I started. Annapolis is where I started my first company. Can we put on my presentation, please? Okay. I start with this thing where everything is a journey, and I started my journey way back in '99. Wow, there's something happening out here. There you go. So I started a company in '98 with all of $100,000. That was my 100% savings that I had. And I started this company on a handshake in Annapolis, Maryland, with a partner of mine on the Labor Day weekend of '98. We started as a company that basically sent voice to India. And we roll back the tape. These are the days when you had the dial-ups, you had the tone and the pulse dial-ups. You had companies that called themselves robotics, but they were basically doing these little dial-up internet connections. So this was around that time, where voice never could be transported outside the phone line, even between states, within the United States. So we were now thinking about actually sending voice from US to India, and then transcribing them, and then putting it back into the US healthcare industry. So start the company as a healthcare documentation company, not a very ambitious kind of a business. Everybody thought I was rather crazy to do a business which was as simple as saying, oh, I'm just transcribing a doctor's dictation. That was really what my business was. Except that it was an $18 billion industry. It was completely disaggregated. There were a whole lot of players in the market. The largest was a company called MedQuest, which was about $400 million in size. And I was competing with MedQuest because that is really how I started the business, saying, hey, one day, either I'm going to take over MedQuest or I am going to be the owner of MedQuest, or MedQuest is going to take me over on my terms. I mean, that was really how I started the company. We grew the company to about $50-odd million size in 2005. I got the company listed in London. And around this time, Philips of Netherlands, which was into voice recognition, wanted to sell their equity stake in the company that I always targeted. That was MedQuest. And it was a 70% equity stake that was being sold. I was about $100 million in size. MedQuest was $400 million. I didn't have the balance of the money, but I went into the auction saying, you know, here I am. I should be a good platform company. I should buy this company. And in the auction, I met my private equity partners, and then we bid for this company. We bought this company. So I became the owner of MedQuest. We suddenly became from a $50 million turnover company to about $450 million company in a span of 1.5 years. And subsequent to that, we started to roll up a bunch of other companies. And by then, technology had changed dramatically. So voice recognition had come in, and we needed to drive the whole voice recognition business. So we went and bought a voice recognition company out of Pittsburgh, put the voice recognition company on top of this company, and in 2011, I then relisted the company on NASDAQ. It was about $600 million in market cap, and One Equity Partners, which is JP Morgan's private equity arm, they came and offered me a premium of $500 million on a $600 million market cap. It was $1.1 billion, and that was my first sale. And the sale was the largest healthcare technology company sale during the year 2012. So it was not bad for somebody who had a vision of going and taking over the market leader, actually executing the whole thing, and then also encashing everybody out in the deal. So my private equity guys were happy because they put in $100 million. They made 450. I put in 100,000. I made a couple of $100 million myself. Everybody was a happy duck. Now, what do you do after this? So, as you know, part of this whole journey, you then become a private equity investor, and you also set up other companies, and that's really what I started to do. Then, you know, you can't keep a good person away for too long. So in about 2016, 17, I had enough of trying to invest with other people, you know, being a passive investor. So I went into doing one more time, one more business. And we started this from scratch. And this was a time when fintech was not really the most popular word. There were fintechs, but nobody really knew what fintech was all about. There were companies that tried to do a bunch of things within this sector. There were people who were lending money on apps in Africa. There was micro-lending that was happening using technology. So they were all scattered around. So around this time, I was looking at the Indian market, and the Indian market hadn't really matured enough on the fintech side. So we went and analyzed the market, and we found there were 130 million millennials. We call them the urban mass. Kids in the age group of 23, 24 to 34, 35. And most of them do not have a credit rating in India. They do not have a credit card. What they do have is a debit card. And they have absolutely no credit history because India doesn't have student loans. So really, there is no past history to deal with. The entire credit history itself is monopolized by a bunch of agencies that used data which was in the past, really your past data. So you had the Experience and the credit unions of the world basically trying to analyze credit on the basis of what you did in the past. When somebody is 23, 24, and he doesn't have a past, how do you evaluate credit? So we went in with this problem in our head, and I hired 10 very, very bright young engineers, 23 years, average age of 23. These guys were smart computer scientists with huge data sciences inputs. I brought them into a room, gave them a problem, and said, can you, in 3 months, give me an algorithm which can actually predict the behavior of a borrower and give me with some accuracy the probability of him paying me back? And the data sets that you probably will have is maybe his social media presence, which a lot of people were trying to do, but most important was the smartphone. Really, it was all about how much information was stored in the smartphone, and could we actually use that data to start predicting. So the kids, I'm the oldest guy in the company, and the average age in my company, Kashi, is 26. So I had all these kids working on this problem in around 2016, and by 2017, April, they came out with a classic solution. I have an app which basically is driven by AI ML. The AI itself is driven by an algorithm called social behavior filter. We basically take about 150 to 200 data points coming out of the smartphone. We then put them all into communities. So each one is a community of salaries, to how many apps you have on the phone, to your behavior on the apps, to what have you visited frequently, to how many phone calls do you make, how many SMSs you do. I mean, there is a rich amount of data on the smartphone which is legitimately available to utility providers like us. And then we had one other remarkable thing happening in the country, and that's the whole tech stack that came out in India in the financial sector, where the government enabled the entire, what we consider as the Aadhaar, which is like the social security number, but it's a unique identification number. So that actually makes easy for an app provider to authenticate the person. It's very important because you're ultimately giving a loan, you need to identify the person. Then there are a bunch of other data points that came about in the tech stack. And finally, when we launched, we were giving loans in exactly 8 minutes. That was the end of the process. When a person downloaded the app and then puts in a bunch of information, which basically is 3-4 documents that he needs to upload, just like you upload your credit card on Uber, and then the ML AI engine takes over. We basically then, run the engine. We give them a credit rating. It goes exactly like your normal credit rating of an Experian. On a 0 to 1,000, if your credit rating is 600, you're not eligible for a loan in any part of the world. When you get a 600 and come to my app, you actually get a loan that you want on your terms, and you also do not have to give me any security or guarantee. You don't have to provide me any other paper than those 4 basic documents that I asked for. You don't have to ever meet me. You don't have to ever interact with me. You don't have to tell me why you're taking the loan, and you don't have to bring your dad, mom, or anybody to guarantee that loan. So really, that was the idea. So when we actually put this out in the market, today we have 3 million downloads of this app. We are downloaded about 6,000 times a day at this particular point. We have about 1 million customers who have given their full information, on the app. We got really, really rich data on 1 million kids. We have analyzed this entire 1 million sets of people, and we can predict for the whole of India everything that needs to be done to give credit to these people, not just for short term, but medium term and long term. The other thing that we've done is, initially when I started this, they thought I was loco because we were giving money, and they said, look, the bad debts are going to mount, you're going to vanish very soon. We started out with a 10% bad debt delinquency rate. Today, in the last 1 year, in fact, every month on month, my bad debt is 0.67%. It is lesser than prime lending bad rates. So it is all about ultimately, how good your technology is, how good your algorithm is, and how good your fulfillment is, how good your underwriting skills are, and how much you've learned in order to understand new age, new tech, to bring a whole bunch of new people into the ecosystem. So currently, we've gone in the last 2 years from 5 million to 122 million is the amount of loans I've given. Our target in the next 24 months is to take this to $1 billion. We have the algorithm which is ready to go global. So we would be putting this out in various markets. The only thing we don't want to do in the worldwide markets is to lend on record, for the simple reason that I never thought in my life that I would have to borrow money from other people because it's a balance sheet kind of a deal. I'd rather have a bank or a financial institution do that. We'll make them do better. We basically are about to go global on this whole algorithm. Now, the first company took me 13 years to be a $1 billion company. I gave myself 5 years for this. So I'm about 2.5 years done. I've got 2.5 years to go. And I can tell you, I'll be back 2.5 years later. This company either is going to be sold for $1 billion or it's going to be on its way to be a $10 billion company. So, that's really what the world is all about, because I think the world is so dramatically changed that the scale-up of companies is staggeringly high, and your opportunities are staggeringly large in number. So you just need to identify the right market, the right technology, obviously. You need to have some smarts that you're doing business better than other people, and then you should have the ambition to go and do it. This time around, I could fund this all myself. So until now, almost 80% of the money was put in by me. I'm right now in the process. A lot of people are talking to me. So we'll figure out how do I enhance my balance sheet as I move forward in building up this business. So that's my story. And some part of it is a bit of luck, obviously, because it's, all businesses are luck by chance. We all need to take the right decisions, the right time, we need to get the right breaks. Going to the auction and having a financial partner, going and doing a deal with him, that was a chance well taken. But also at the same time, you need to have the vision when you start a company to be the best in that business. Because if you don't aim to be the number one or the number two, don't start a business. It's not worthwhile. So that's my little story. And I hope, a few of you would emulate this. And we'll meet again in the next Gen workshops.
Thank you so much. This was such an interesting story because I know we have a lot of people in the audience who would love to have this algorithm. In the US alone, there are over 100 million people without access to credit, and most of those people are millennials. And I know in Latin America there's a huge market too. But I want to go to that concept of setting that ambitious vision from the very beginning. Because I've noticed, I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford, and 10 years ago when I started, kids would come and say, I want to make my first million before 30. 5 years ago, they said, I want to make my first billion before 30. And now they come and say, I want to kill Facebook. So definitely times are changing. There's an inflation even on the ambition that some of these kids have. If we have time at the end of the talks, I will invite the speakers to the stage and accept some questions from you guys. But because we're running a little bit late, we'll just keep moving. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a few minutes for questions. Moving along, we have next Armando Viteri. He's the chair in the Phoenix chapter of the MIT Enterprise Forum. He was trained also at MIT as an AI programmer. He was an early employee of Sun Microsystems, currently the CEO of NewBlock. And he's been really in every imaginable role in the creation of new companies, as a founder, as an investor, as an LP in new funds, as a board member, and as a connector in the ecosystem. And he's going to be talking about the changing landscape of technology investing. Please welcome Armando.
Well, there's quite a few MITers. This is awesome. Man, feels like being back on campus. So, as Rebeca mentioned, my own background is I've been involved in technology startups from the earliest part of my career. However, as usually happens, as you move past the entrepreneur stage, you move into the investor stage. And so I've transitioned to be focused more around investing. I am CEO of NewBlock, which is an AI software development, general application software development company, but with a specific focus around AI development. However, an awful lot of what I do today focuses around early stage tech investing, in particular in Silicon Valley, but generally in the western part of the United States. And one of the things that I want to wind up emphasizing as part of this talk that we'll do today is that despite anything you ever hear, there is no monopoly on good ideas only from Stanford, California, or Palo Alto, Massachusetts. Good ideas happen everywhere. Unfortunately, historically, all the infrastructure that's required, the capital, the mentoring, et cetera, didn't allow for the true globalization of those ideas to be funded. And that is going to be the premise of this conversation, is that's changing right now. So, a little bit of kind of landscape about what's going on in technology investing. Last year was a banner year for venture capital investing. It hit $100 billion for the first time since the dot-com era. In fact, this last quarter, it's even at a faster pace in terms of investing. So venture capital investing continues to grow. In particular, supergiant VC rounds of $100 million or more have hit all-time highs. So all of a sudden, where a typical Series A was the 7 to 10 million, and you progress toward larger and larger rounds, these later rounds have now gotten to be $1 billion in size and greater. That's been a very distinct change that's happened very recently, as you can tell by the graph. So things are, underneath the surface, things are changing, however, and the nature of technology investing is changing on a global basis. So one of the things that's changing that's really important is the nature of how venture capital fits into earlier stage investing is changing. where in a previous generation, venture capitalists get involved even down to the seed capital level, that's increasingly rare. If you go into Silicon Valley, it's even harder and harder to get a Series A or Series B done through venture capital source unless you have a really special company. Venture capital firms are tending toward larger funds. They're tending toward much, and as a result, larger rounds and larger, later stages. The other thing that's happened that's been a notable trend is as emphasized here in this graph, is that early stage VC funding, seed stage VC funding has really diminished over the last few years. That wound up leaving a huge vacuum. And that vacuum, obviously, not just in the United States, but globally, has created the opportunity for the rise of organized angel groups. So now organized angel groups exist everywhere on the planet. In the US, they're increasingly larger and larger in size, and they're also increasingly better organized. In particular way that they're organizing is they're historically an angel group would consist of about 80 to 100 members located in a city, let's say Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm from. Typical angel group would wind up doing about $2 million over a span of a year in terms of angel investing, typical, and that would be spread around 80 or 100 members. So typically you're talking about $200,000 or $300,000 rounds. Very hard for a company that's now in need of getting $1 million, $2 million worth of funding in a round. It's very difficult to do that through a single angel group. And so now angel groups are organizing into syndicate groups. And a typical of syndicate groups is the Angel Syndication Network. Originally, conceptually, Angel Syndication Network, ASN, was organized around the western states, in particular the southwest of the US. But now, if you actually look on that chart, you'll see Harvard Business School Angels as part of it. There's several Boston Angel groups that are part of the Angel Syndication Network. This has increasingly become a national syndication network, which means for a startup, they can approach a single local angel group, get a financing round, but then find themselves being syndicated to 30 plus other angel groups, thus suddenly giving them access to be able to raise $1 million, $2 million round, which was very difficult to do up until recently. So, obviously in early stage investing, as a result, angel groups and super angels really dominate the landscape as VCs have moved later stage. But probably one of the most important things that's happening is the globalization of angel investing. So historically, again, let's use an example of Phoenix, Arizona technology investors. Historically, a group like that would only have had members that invested in local deals. They would only look at companies that they could drive to. That's changing pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. Probably the best single example in the industry of that is the advent of these mega angel groups. Keiretsu Forum is probably the best example of that. Keiretsu Forum, where a typical angel group would be 80 to 100 members, only focusing around a particular metro urban area. The Keiretsu Forum group today has 53 chapters that exist in 3 different continents, have 30, they're pushing 4,000 members at this point. It's a completely different scale of group. And it's also, by its nature, it's global in scope. And as a result, I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs here, where they're either entrepreneurs or members of entrepreneurial ecosystems in smaller economies, where really the access to capital that people talk about is in the order of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you really do need access to more cash than that if you're going to build a global company. All of a sudden, organizations like Keiretsu allow companies, even if they're located where I'm from, Quito, Ecuador, even if they're located there, it gives them access to a global network of investors that will take these companies on, as long as it's a good fundable idea, but it gives you access to a global group of investors that can take a local company, even if it's not located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but yet give it access to the kind of capital that it's going to need to grow. So for Keiretsu, a little bit more about Keiretsu. Keiretsu, as a result of this, has now, actually this is an old chart, this is 2017, they're consistently the #1 ranked, month after month, quarter after quarter, the #1 source of angel early stage capital in the world, right? Very different from the way angel groups were even thought of even 5 years ago. So another thing that's really distinctly different, which is actually, I believe, a really big advantage for early companies, is for the first time in very large numbers, family offices are investing. So a family office, by definition, is a high net worth family that organizes its funds, its investment funds, into a formalized family office that then in turn makes portfolio investments on behalf of the family. And there's 3,000 to 5,000 of them around the world. They represent $4 trillion in total assets. Already, a quarter of those are investing directly. And what's happening is, historically, those family offices were oftentimes LPs in established VC funds. And increasingly, these family offices are saying, you know what? Instead of me piggybacking as an LP in a VC fund, instead of doing that, why don't I get the opportunity to invest directly myself? As a result, I'm not going to be paying the 2 and 20 fees associated with VCs. Maybe I'm doing that as an add-on to what I've already would have done into a VC portfolio, but I'm going to invest directly. So as a result of that, the good news out of this investing that's happening right now is there's a number of very, very large family offices willing to write pretty large checks against interesting deals, and they're willing to do it globally. The bad news here has been that a strong value add for venture capitalists is that you do have venture capital firms, by its nature, are sophisticated technology investors. Family offices aren't necessarily. Now, we're not talking about Paul Allen's Vulcan Group, right? That was a very sophisticated, essentially, family office. But I'm talking about general family offices who may have made their money in Campbell Soup or being developers, et cetera. They're not sophisticated technology investors. As a result of that, what's happening, in fact, this is happening everywhere in the US, I suspect it's happening globally, is that increasingly there are capital advisory firms that are acting as adjuncts to these family offices. And those capital advisory firms tend to look like serial entrepreneurs. They're willing to provide both the screening, diligence, and ongoing shepherding, mentoring of these companies as a substitute for some of the services the venture capital firm would have provided. Those kind of capital advisory firms are getting formed everywhere. So the result of all this is kind of bring back the idea. All of a sudden there is, perhaps for the first time in the technology space at least, there is a much broader range of investment options. And those investment options are, for the first time, willing to look at relatively early stage companies, willing to invest in them, and willing to invest in them on a global basis. I believe that that's an underlying trend, and I think more and more that will wind up turning into this idea that you don't have a monopoly on good ideas only in Stanford, California, or Palo Alto, Massachusetts. A good idea will be formed everywhere, including Venezuela. It will get funded, it will get scale, it will get globalized. Good money will find those deals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you gave people like me, a VC in San Francisco, very bad news. Sometimes it does feel like when there are good deals that we're going shopping on Boxing Day after Thanksgiving, we have to really fight for the access to good deals. Lots of questions on this, but we'll leave it to the end. Thank you so much for your perspective on the new landscape of investing. And I think the good news for all of you entrepreneurs in the audience is that you do have a lot of options. You just have to be informed that going to Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley is not just the only option that you have to capitalize your business. Next, we have Stephanie Maris, whom I know since almost a decade ago as well, from San Francisco. She's going to give you tips on how to raise capital. Through the Entrepreneurship Center at UCSF, Stephanie has helped 37 companies raise more than $250 million in funding. She is an expert in life sciences, on entrepreneurship, with degrees from Cornell, Columbia, Wharton. Please welcome Stephanie to the stage.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi. Salam alaikum. I'm going to start with a personal story. So I was a serial entrepreneur by the time I was age 8. My first venture was something every little kid in America does. I started a lemonade stand in front of my house. And it was an okay business, not great, because where I grew up in New York, the weather wasn't always that hot, so people weren't that thirsty. And then it rained a lot when it was hot, so they didn't come and buy my lemonade. So I did that for a while, and then I decided I could find a better business. And my second business was coloring napkins. Do I have a clicker? Slides. Oh. Okay, there's my lemonade stand. So I found these white napkins that had an imprinted design of baskets and ribbons, and I colored them. And my family, my relatives, went to a summer house, and they all congregated there. And I would hang out in the living room, and then when a relative showed up in the living room, I'd hit them up for a sale. And it was a pretty easy sale. So I had great margins. I had a lot of repeat business, and a captive market, no competition. And I thought, this is what it's like to be an entrepreneur. It's just really fun and easy. So fast forward a lot of years, and my second venture, or third, was a real startup, which was doing an entrepreneurship center at the University of California. And you might say, now how can a university center be a startup? But I'm going to tell you, it was totally a startup. I had no budget, no office, no staff, no direction, and no job security. It was perfect. It's what I wanted. It was a blank sheet of paper. And they let me paint whatever I wanted on it. So as Rebecca said in the introduction, it's now, sorry, this is me and my startup. I keep forgetting these slides. So this is what it looks like now, 7 years later, and we've helped launch 37 companies, raised an aggregate $300 million. And I teach and mentor faculty and students who are intellectual heavyweights working on cutting-edge science and clinical ideas, but they are absolutely clueless about business. And so that's what I teach them, how to create a business plan and attract investment. I have a great Rolodex of Silicon Valley investors. Don't always want to invest in my early stage companies, but I do come from the land of unicorns. So I'm going to share 6 tips with you today that can help make your search for investment successful. How many entrepreneurs are here in this room? Oh, great. Okay, I was afraid you were all investors. Good. So none of these tips are rocket science. Any one of you can follow the formula and make it work for you. So tip number 1, engage with emotion. You know, investors are people. We all find cut and dried, fact-based pitches boring. You have to figure out how to be interesting and how to get people to sit up and notice you. So let's pretend I'm an investor. It's 3 p.m. I've seen 5 pitches already today. And I know that I've got a conference call about a problem portfolio company at 4:30, an hour and a half away. My 6th pitch is about to walk in. How is that person going to get me to notice them and to listen? Breaking through my background noise. Well, suppose they said this, and this is a true story. In November 2015, My childhood friend, Mark Duntley, died of cardiac arrest in his sleep at age 40. Technology could have saved him. But because of Mark, I started iBeat and created a watch that continually monitors your heart for life-threatening emergencies. Suddenly I'm paying attention. Wow, how big is this opportunity? What's the tech? I'm waiting for the next slide. Okay, so you don't have a life or death idea. How about this consumer service? It was started by one of my students. I saw this image 5 years ago, probably 1,000 pitches ago, and I still remember it. I still think about this. Jay said to our class, this is my grandmother. She has to go to medical appointments a lot, and I can't always leave work to take her. But I'm not going to send her with any random taxi driver. I'm going to start a company, Lyft Hero, to help her and people like her. Every driver is extensively vetted before we allow them to drive family members. It's a trust thing. I listened. This leads directly to tip number 2, show passion. Passion is essential for startup success. You have to be passionate about the problem you're solving to justify those 80-hour-a-week work hours that you're putting in for your startup. You know, people around Silicon Valley, which is where I'm from, often say, I'm going to change the world with this idea. It's not really about the money, it's about changing the world. And that's passion. Consider the mission of Virta Health, a recent startup showing diabetes can be reversed by being on a ketogenic diet. The founder, Sami Inkinen, is an orphan triathlete in his 30s. He also rode from Monterey, California to Hawaii in an open boat. Crazy guy. And one day he discovered that he was headed toward being a diabetic. And he started on a ketogenic diet, and reversed his pre-diabetes. So he decided to aim for scale. He wanted to reverse diabetes in 100 million people by 2025. Investors saw that passion that Sami had, also knew his track record and liked his business plan, and they gave him $100 million. Okay, so you can't all raise $100 million, but there's a lesson there. Here are 2 pitches that I saw recently. One was for an AI machine learning company that was analyzing contracts. Now, AI and machine learning are total buzzwords these days, right? But this is a boring business, and the entrepreneur was really boring. So I saw this with a bunch of angels, and they said no passion. They passed. The second pitch was for a smart feeding tube company for hospitalized babies. And this is the way the founder started. He said, this is George. George had trouble eating when he was born, so a nurse inserted a feeding tube to help him. The next day, George ate even less. And on day 3, he stopped eating completely. On day 4, he died. The feeding tube had been mistakenly inserted into his lung rather than his stomach. I started this company, so there'll never be another George. The room was totally silent. Wow, what passion. Tip 3, do your homework. Imagine you're an early stage electric airplane company. You're looking for $5 million to get to an initial design. You're meeting with Ahmed, a partner at a major venture capital firm who's a friend of a friend. What you don't know is that Ahmed's interest is in food technology, not autonomous vehicles. And his fund only invests when there's already a proof of concept. So guess what? You've just wasted everyone's time. Or suppose you find an investor who really likes autonomous vehicles and electric airplanes, but he doesn't have any more money to invest. His fund is at the tail end of its life. So he takes the meeting because he wants to see what you're doing and stay on top of the field. But what's going to come of it is nothing, no money. So you need to know who you're talking to and what the situation is. Are they in your area of focus? Are you talking to the right partner in the firm? Is there money available? Do they invest in your stage of development? This information is usually available with a pretty simple web search. This is a very famous venture capital firm in the Silicon Valley, and there's lots you can find out about them. When you figure out who your target is, get a warm introduction. That means no cold emails, those are useless, and don't send your business plan to info@ in the name of the firm, because no one's going to read it. Use a school connection, a friend connection, or work connection to get in. Tip number 4, be likable and coachable. Investors fall in love with entrepreneurs. Maybe you remind them of their kids or kids they never had. They're going to be with you for years because they're going to be there until they can get a return. You're really in a relationship. And investors want to use their expertise and make connections for you. They want you to listen, they want you to be coachable, and they don't want to just hand over money. And if you choose your investors carefully, their advice is truly invaluable. This is one of my portfolio companies, Vi Therapeutics. It's a microbiome company. Hwang took my class in 2015, and he stayed in touch afterwards. He got a government grant, he started up his company, he ran through the money, and he needed to find investors. He had every barrier in front of him. Investors didn't want to touch microbiome technology. They didn't want a consumer product, which is what he was doing. His wife was in the company as a founder. They didn't like that. But he persisted, and he kept asking for my advice all along. He really made me feel he valued my opinion, and the feedback was important to him. So over the months, he pivoted his business plan. He got his wife out of the company. I don't know how he did that. Still married. Negotiated a financing, then decided he didn't like the terms, and I stayed there with him, and he kept on asking me, what should I do, what should I do? And I'd spent many, many hours with him, and I did it because I liked the guy, and he listened. He's coachable. Tip number 5, present the information investors need. Investors are all about avoiding risk. They focus on 3 things: the problem you're solving and your solution, the market, and the team. So first, how well do you understand the problem that you're solving? Have you done customer interviews? Is this your domain expertise? Does the solution fit the market need, that product market fit thing? I love it when a founder says, I've interviewed 100 customers, and they've all confirmed to me that this is really big problem, and there's really no solution for it. I'm going to fix that. I know he's done this homework. Second, how big is the opportunity? Is the market big enough to support a scalable startup? Will you be able to build the business to a critical mass so that there's going to be a big exit for the investors? And then third, the team. The team is all important. Some people say it is the most important thing you can do. Which leads me to tip number 6, build an all-star team. It's people who are going to make the business happen. You have to sell your experience, your domain knowledge, your leadership skill, and your vision. Find co-founders who complement you. It's powerful when someone says, look, Tim and I have been in 2 companies together. We know how to partner. We're going to do it again in this one. Pitches that start with a powerful team slide. This is an example. Give context to the pitch. You want investors thinking, wow, they might just be able to pull this off. So that's my list of 6 tips to give you a head start in fundraising. All of you can do this and make yourself stand out from the sea of pitches investors get every week. I'm going to close with a picture of this beautiful animal, the Arabian oryx. It lives here on the peninsula, and so maybe some of you have seen one. Oryx have been tied to the unicorn myth since the 15th century. They say if you squint and you're at a distance, it could be a unicorn. Silicon Valley has unicorns. The Arabian Peninsula has oryx. And maybe somebody in this room is going to be the first billion-dollar oryx company. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. What was amazing about your tips were that all of the examples and concrete illustrations made it really easy for people to follow them. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next speaker is Mr. Victor Hwang. Are you in the room? Oh, there you go. Same last name as mine. We're not related. I wish we were. He is currently the Vice President of Entrepreneurship at Kauffman Foundation. He was, prior to this, an entrepreneur in the nanotech space, a VC with T2 Venture Creation, and also the founder of Global Innovation Summit, which I had the pleasure of attending when it was held for the first time. And also, he's the author of best-selling books, The Rainforest, The Secret of Building the Next Silicon Valley, and its sequel, The Rainforest Blueprint. Please welcome Victor Hwang in telling us about how to lower barriers for entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Thanks, sis. I don't have a presentation, so I'll just talk with you. How you guys doing? It's afternoon. Just getting kind of tired a little bit. Me too. I have jet lag. I slept 2 hours last night, so that's what always happens. My second night in a place, when it's on the other side of the world, I sleep 2 hours. So if I fall asleep here, sister, you'll pick me up and prop me back up again. So I thought I'd do a few things. I kind of go without a script because I think that'll keep me more awake. So one, share with you a little bit about my personal story. Two, talk a little bit about Kauffman and how we're approaching entrepreneurship. And third, give you an example of how we're actually thinking like entrepreneurs at Kauffman and talk you through this new project we just launched called the Capital Access Lab, which capital seems to be the theme of the day, and I'll talk to you about how we do it and how we think about it. Is that good? Okay. Yes? Nods, sort of? Yes? Okay. So, so my personal journey. So I was born in Louisiana, which is not people's first guess in the United States, and I lived up and down the middle of the United States. So I'm actually a creature of the middle of the country in the U.S. And as a Chinese American, it was not a common thing when I was young. And so my parents were immigrants, and I think because my parents were immigrants, I always saw the United States growing up from sort of the perspective of different sides. I always saw it as a bit of an outsider, and I was never fully in, nor was I ever fully out. And so one thing, what happens when you're being raised in a society where you're not fully part of it and you're not fully apart from it is you have a sense of justice because you see the unfairness all around you. And so growing up, I saw that there were places where there was more wealth, there was more opportunity, and there were other places that were not. There were groups of people that had more opportunity and other groups that did not. And my parents became entrepreneurs later in life. My grandfather had run a retail store as an entrepreneur, and so I became an entrepreneur later in life. And I think my search throughout my entire life was around how do you create opportunity, and what is it that drives certain places to be more prosperous than others. And that's what led to so many things that I've done. It led to my book on the rainforest. It led to the Global Innovation Summit that Rebeca mentioned, where we actually tested out a lot of the ideas on how this conference is being run right now, around how we do group collaboration and group facilitation and how you convene lots of people from different backgrounds. So for me, this idea of entrepreneurship as a means for the good life, to create opportunity and equality of access for people, no matter what their zip code is or who their parents are or what the color of their skin is or what they believe in, they have an equal chance, a fair shot at being able to pursue their dreams. So when I got a call from the Kauffman Foundation 3.5 years ago, I couldn't turn it down. And there was a chance, there was a headhunter called me and said, hey, there's a chance to run the entrepreneurship department. And I'd always been an admirer of the foundation from afar. In fact, I'd been a grant recipient in the past. They'd sponsored the conference I was mentioning earlier. And I did one of those things when you're, when you're interviewing, you want to, I guess the traditional advice is to, keep your cards close and to try to, learn about the job before you really dive into it. So the first thing I said when I sat down for my interview with the CEO is, I just want you to know, this is my dream job. I'll take, this is the best job in the world. And so I ended up taking the job. And what I've tried to do since coming to the Kauffman Foundation is to apply entrepreneurial thinking to the way we approach problem solving. And when your problem you're trying to solve is entrepreneurship, it's actually a really hard problem to solve because it's such a big one. And I mean, what is an entrepreneur after all? What types of entrepreneurs do you want to help? Why those people versus other people? How do you even begin to tackle such a problem? And one of the big problems we've looked at is around capital access. And so that was something that when I first joined the foundation, we were thinking around how do we actually tackle this issue of capital access? If you talk to entrepreneurs, they'll tell you one of the biggest issues they have is where do we find capital from? That's just a persistent theme of entrepreneurship as a whole. And there's tons of research, tons of data, and tons of programs, government-funded programs, tons of sponsored programs to try to address capital access issues for entrepreneurs. So what's left to do, and why is this problem still so pervasive? So we actually tried to approach it from a different way. So if you looked at it from the needs of the customer, the needs of the user, you start less from the side of, here's our idea and we're just going to throw it on the world, which is the way most programs work, right? So when you look at most capital programs that governments do, or sponsored funds do, they'll say, well, we're going to put money at that and we're going to make that money grow, we're going to invest in the right places, and we're getting a return. That's the supply side model of capital access. So we thought about it from a demand side. What about the customer? Let's look at the entrepreneurs as customers. And so we looked around and said, who's actually studied the customer base of entrepreneurs and look at their capital access? It turns out no one had really looked at it from a customer side problem, at least in the US. No one had looked at it. So we actually did our own analysis. And this was actually survey data that Kauffman had sponsored through the US Census Bureau to examine the needs of entrepreneurs from capital side. And we found this interesting data that came out of it, which is if you look at where entrepreneurs get their money from to start their businesses, most of the attention is spent on venture capital. People talk about venture capital as the big problem, and they talk about bank lending. How can we increase more venture capital? How can we increase more bank lending? If we increase those things, we've solved the problems for entrepreneurs. It turns out the data doesn't really show that. If you look at the data, about 0.6% of entrepreneurs access venture capital. So it's a tiny sliver of like the best of the best, highest growth companies get venture capital, primarily tech scalable companies. About 16% of businesses access bank lending. So you'd think there's a lot more, but because most businesses, when they're getting started, they don't have assets that a bank can make a security. They don't have a track record. They don't have a few years of financial statements. So no bank will give them a loan. So if you're a service business and you've only been around a year, no bank will give you a loan to grow that business. So most businesses, 83% or more of businesses, are either not fast enough growth to get venture capital, or they haven't been around long enough to get a bank loan. So that leaves a huge number of businesses in the middle. And so we looked at that problem as, well, that's a market gap. That's a huge problem. If you look at it from the customer side, you see this big problem. So then we said, all right, so how do we tackle that? And so like any good entrepreneurs we do, we started talking to the marketplace of capital to say, what's going on out there? How are people tackling that gap? And it turns out there are a few people in the US that are playing with different models to fill that 83% gap. Now, they didn't know it was 83%. They just knew there was a need. And they knew there was a need in certain types of places and certain types of markets. So I'll give you an example. So there's an entrepreneur in Kansas City. It's a real woman. Her name is Natasha Griswold. And she used to be a hair cutter. So she worked at a Walmart where she'd cut people's hair. And one day, one of her clients said, you know what? I can't keep coming here because I live in a nursing home And to come here, I have to carry my dialysis machine around with me. I can't do it. Can you come give me a haircut at my nursing home? So she goes to the nursing home and ends up, they have a huge line of people that want haircuts. And so she realizes, all right, this is kind of interesting. And she keeps looking at that and eventually starts realizing she's got a business on her hands doing mobile haircut salons at nursing homes for senior people. And so she actually starts to build her business and starts to build up a pretty good list of clients. But she needs $20,000 to buy a truck to be able to do a mobile hair salon unit. And she can't get $20,000. And the reason she can't get $20,000 is because it costs a bank for a bank to service a small business with a $100,000 loan over 5 years costs the bank $100,000. So banks don't do loans in the $100,000 or less range in the United States. So banks don't do those types of food trucks. And she's not a venture capital scalable company because she's doing haircuts for people. It's not a fast growth tech company. So she can't get a $20,000 loan. So that's the real type of entrepreneur that is a typical entrepreneur that just can't get capital. And they've got a real business. And she's employing like a lot of people now doing this. She's actually got a base of people going around doing these mobile hair salon units. So this company is called Elder Hair Care, and she needs capital. And there's lots of businesses like these. This is just one simple example. So it turns out there are people doing business loans right now in little fragmented pockets where they'll do hybrid models. Well, they'll say, you know what, if you've got a track record and you're getting this type of revenue, we'll give you a loan based off of your revenue, and we'll take a percentage of your revenue, or we'll take a percentage of royalties off your product sales. And if you actually watch the TV show Shark Tank, you guys ever watch Shark Tank? Yes? Most of those investors are always negotiating these hybrid deals. They're negotiating like, well, I'm going to take a percentage of your sales, percentage of your product royalties, and I'll get an equity kicker at the end, right? They always negotiate these deals because these investors on Shark Tank, they actually know how to structure these deals. It turns out structuring hybrid models takes some kind of creative business modeling, but it's not one that people typically know how to do. There's actually not a place for investors to go to learn how to do that. It also turns out there's not a good place for entrepreneurs to go to learn how to structure those deals either. So entrepreneurs are scared by those deals. Most investors aren't sophisticated enough to know how to do those deals. So big gap in the marketplace. So what have we done? So we took a look at that and we said, all right, can we actually help seed new funds in this space? Funds that are trying to experiment with new business models, not pure venture capital, not pure lending, but mixtures of those in different formats and different models and different platforms and different shapes and sizes. Can we create a place to seed that kind of capital? And we can subsidize them, but is that the best way? And we were actually inspired by the work in the 1980s in Israel. Are you familiar with the YOSMA fund in Israel? Some of you? A few of you. So YOSMA was started in the 1980s by the government of Israel to seed, at that time, what was the new field of venture capital. 1993. Oh, I'm off by a few years. 93. And Israel today has the highest per capita venture capital money at work of any nation in the world. And it was YOSMA that actually started most of those venture funds in Israel. And it's credited with being one of the great success stories of capital. Now, we don't live in 1993 anymore. We live in a different era. And venture capital is already well known. But could we take that basic idea that there could be a seed fund that actually funded new fund creation in that space? So we combined all these different threads. We took the entrepreneurial analysis and understanding the marketplace. We started to spend time with the people that we were trying to get into and support and help in the marketplace. And we also looked at lessons in business that had been successful in the past. And so we launched this new entity called the Capital Access Lab. This was just in December, just a few months ago. And what we did is we took $3 million and we put it into a fund whose sole mission would be to test out new funds that were trying to get started to serve entrepreneurs in that 83% market gap. And we're now in April. We've had over 80 funds apply to this seed fund to get money to get started in fund creation. And they come from so many different walks of life. And we've got those 80 funds that applied. We've also got more funds that have actually said, you know, we were interested in doing something like that before, but we didn't know anyone would even put money into something like that. So maybe we'll think about starting one now. So it's really interesting because it was a market that's been waiting to be developed. Because all you have to do is get out of the current categories and definitions of how you're normally thinking about capital. You know, most people think in certain categories, but start without those categories and think, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we create a new product to solve that problem and fill that need? And by doing that, we've actually, so far, at this point, we've generated a tremendous amount of interest, which is beyond what we expected, and we're starting to see some real progress. So this is an experiment in progress, and this could totally fail. I could be back here in a year telling you it just didn't work. But that's where we are right now, and this is the way we're trying to solve problems, is by acting like entrepreneurs, looking at the markets, testing and prototyping. So this is just a prototype pilot version of this fund. Potentially it can grow much bigger and seed more fund creation. And also be willing to experiment and be willing to risk and fail. So I thought that'd be interesting just to share with you how we're thinking about this, also the scale of the problems that we're trying to tackle, and the ways that we're trying to go about it in an iterative, experimental way. And so every fund that we invest in out of this is really a scientific hypothesis. It's that we think this thing has a chance of working because it fills these criteria in the marketplace. But I think that's the best we can do, because these problems we tackle are so big. And I think, if anything, I just encourage you to think like entrepreneurs, no matter where in the ecosystem you play, because I think the world could use more experimentation and risk calculation and willingness to try things out. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Victor, or AKA my new brother. That was amazing, because I think that in terms of access to capital around the world, the traditional venture model doesn't work everywhere. And I'm really glad to hear that you guys are leading the thought process on this. Great. So now we're going to go to Latin America with Felipe Buitrago. He is the Economic and Strategic Counselor at the Office of the President in Colombia. And he is an expert on the orange economy. He will be talking about how creative economists can create a lot of impact in entrepreneurial ecosystems. His personal background is in public policy, almost 2 decades, working with international negotiations and public policy. He was the director of Tic Tac, a think tank, and a consultant to IDB. And let's welcome Felipe. There you go, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. So, a Cherokee tale of two wolves. It's of a grandfather telling to his grandson that there is a terrible fight within every one of us. This is a terrible fight between a wolf that is darkness, is despair, is no future. And the other wolf is light, is hope. It's a future of opportunities. And what does this tale has to do with public policy? Well, we are living a very uncertain period of time in history. It's what people call a revolution, an industrial revolution, a change of an era. And when that happens, policymakers get in trouble, because we have to face that financial sector is changing, the economy is changing, how people deal with social and political problems is changing. And one of the particular elements of the current times we live is that we face a big threat. Artificial intelligence is what a lot of people thinks is actually going to make us irrelevant as people, right? Because a teenager today is going to work in a likelihood of 60 to 70% in jobs that do not exist today. And that's a big challenge for policymakers. That's why entrepreneurship becomes so relevant today in order to create opportunities. We need to create new industries. We need to change education. We need to change the financial system. We need to change how we rule people, right? But it's not only that. It's also that we need new skills. And when we speak about new skills, we have to think about, do we want to be a barrel of oil in the new world, or do we want to be something more? And why a barrel of oil? Anyone with a an Instagram account or a WhatsApp account, bear in mind that Facebook paid $30 for each one of those accounts. So you are worth a barrel of oil on the internet. So what would you do about it? Would you just take a selfie and make your account more valuable? Or would you do something more? What's what you are going to change in your mindset in order to improve the future of millions of young people? Well, we propose to squeeze an orange. And why an orange? Because, well, the orange is full of juice, right? But what's the juice of this orange, what we call the orange economy? Well, it's the economy based on content. It's the economy based on our culture, our art, our identity, our symbolism. And why it is so important? Well, for starters, because when you think about culture and when you think about the skills we need in order to face the fourth industrial revolution, well, a lot of the soft skills that we require are all developed while we exercise culture. How we exercise empathy, how we exercise our understanding in cultural terms, bridging between gaps of gender, gaps of race, gaps of age, right? And the point is here that if machines are becoming ever better at being machines, we have to become better at being humans. And part of it means understanding reality. And I use Iron Man here, and for sure you are all thinking about Robert Downey Jr., right? Especially girls, I know you like him a lot. But what matters here is when you think about the main character, very often in entrepreneurship happens the same. We think about the unicorn, and that's like the only thing that there's for you to aspire. And we have just been hearing about how important that other kind of ventures. And the point here is Iron Man required 3,109 people to become a reality. So 3,108 are not the unicorn in the picture. So we need to think about all the other activities. When we speak about the development of the orange economy, we're not speaking about making everybody Robert Downey Jr. We're speaking about the whole ecosystem that allows Iron Man to become a reality. We are speaking about visual effects. We are speaking about the supporting actors. We are speaking about illumination. We are speaking about recording. We are speaking about logistics, all sorts of activities that make it possible for something come out of nowhere and become a blockbuster that everybody can enjoy. And this comes to the point, what we do in terms of policy. Well, we think that in order to make great policy for entrepreneurship, we have to approach it, especially on creative issues, as teaching a boy or a girl to roller skate. And what do you need in order for this boy or this girl to learn? You need to give them three things: affection, right? Counsel, and protection. Because at the end, when you are entrepreneuring, you are not going to see if you may or may not fall. You are going to fall for sure. That's going to happen. That's a fact. So what you need? Affection. Why you need that? Well, it happens that if you are trying to learn how to roller skate and you fail, and your parents and your friends start pointing at you, mocking you, and actually telling you that you are good for nothing, you should not try that, will you ever rise again and try? Probably not. But what happens in society with entrepreneurs is very often that. They fail, and friends and family start saying, you are useless. Why you try that? I mean, go and employ yourself because your dreams are not good enough to keep falling. So we need to change that. We need to surround them with affection. So what we do around that? Our president literally won an election with the following proposition: legality plus entrepreneurship builds equality. And look at that. It's let's follow rules because, you know, we have to ensure that everybody feels safe. That gives you certainty about certain rights. But let's together build a nation that understands entrepreneurship, that supports the creation of new companies that supports the following of dreams, and the combination of it is going to build the welfare that everybody needs, the opportunities that people deserve in the 21st century. So you need to create affection. You need to change the mindset of the society, so affection is going to be there for entrepreneurs, for those with the courage to try. Counsel, of course, if you have a little girl, right, you need to tell her, hey, try to stay with equilibrium. Bend your knees, you know, I mean, don't do that, do this, right? It's try to advise the people on the main mistakes they are going to make and that are avoidable. Of course, there are going to be mistakes you can't avoid. But for that, what you do, you create an entrepreneurial ecosystem of support in the form of education. So you change the curriculum in different schools, schools of business, but also the schools of arts, the schools of philosophy, the schools of anything, because at the end, whether you're going to become a big entrepreneur or not, you need to know certain things in order to make decisions, in order to engage with people. And in that sense, we have created a set of courses, and we are creating even more spaces for creatives, for entrepreneurs, to find the right advice, to find the right counsel, to find the right friend, so they can avoid the most simple mistakes. But also, because when they need to step up, somebody has to tell and give them a bit of feedback. Hey, what you have learned about it? I mean, have you made a mistake? Yeah, sure. But is it the end of the world? No. So what you're going to do next? That's very important, the counsel. And the third, the protection. You need a helmet. Otherwise, if you fail while you're trying and you hit yourself too hard, right? Well, you might become too wary of trying again, or you get injured, you have to go to the hospital, and that prevents you from trying again soon. So you will forget lessons. And here, we have been hearing a lot, is where capital is important, access to certain protection. And capital is not only about money, it's also about access to markets. It's also about meeting the right people, it's also about learning the right logistics. And for that, we are also creating a range of capital access ventures, a range of capital facilitation initiatives, so people can access funds when they need a fund. People can access a specialized advice, which is expensive, and, well, not everybody can afford them, and sometimes it's what you really need, not really just money. And we are trying also to create a better financial system, a system that diversifies and stops just lending to those with most of the money. And if we can do that, we can change our world. And in Colombia, we believe so much that the future is about entrepreneurship and creativity. We are literally betting that the core value we want to tell the world is that we are creative. That's why we have just launched the first label for creativity in the world. While most countries still try to put the made in everywhere, we are saying that our film creates the country, but our countrymen creates films. It's circular, intentional, because we think that you are not a country of entrepreneurs or an entrepreneur in a country. Your country creates entrepreneurs, your entrepreneurs build the country. And we do that with film. We are betting on art as well. Our artists create the country. Our country creates arts. The same for design, the same for fashion, the same for software. At the end, if you are a curious kid, right, and your grandpa tells you that story, you will ask, Grandpa, which wolf will win? And the grandpa will say, well, you know, the wolf you feed. We have chosen to feed the wolf of light, of opportunity, of a future for all Colombians. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Felipe. You know, when people ask which jobs will disappear first with automation, our some of the highest paying jobs today, software engineers, programmers, are easier to replace than creatives and artists and people who are in the orange economy. So this is really enlightening for us to also pay attention to these sectors in building our own ecosystems. Okay, so we have the last two talks, and I want you guys to get some energy up and pay very close attention, because now we're going to talk about purpose and mission and how social impact can be a part of this equation when you create companies that generate wealth but also solve very important social problems in our countries. So the first of the next two talks will be by Marta del Castillo, who's Spanish by birth but now lives in Paraguay. She has a decade of experience in development, international development, and humanitarian aid. And she's a graduate of the University of Stanford, as well as la Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. Let's welcome Marta.
Thank you very much. I don't come from the MIT, but I wish, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, today I'm going to talk mostly about fashion, because you know that orange is the new black? Okay, now purpose is the new profit. Let me see if this works.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
In 1997, Steve Jobs put voice to this advertisement. He didn't realize at that time that he was one of the crazy ones, one who made things different, one who was willing to change the world. We believe in Koch, where I work, that the crazy ones are entrepreneurs. But by entrepreneurs, I don't mean those who are starting a business, who are looking for a new solution to a problem. Entrepreneurs, for us, is those who defy the status quo, those who want to change the world. And we see entrepreneurs everywhere. We see it in the social sector. We see them in the private sector. We see them in the government, in the public sector. And what does make the difference between these people and regular business people? For me, it's clear. It's what they believe in. Let me tell you the story of this guy, Yvon Chouinard. He was 9 years old when he moved from Maine to California. He was a very young and very timid guy, so he was very difficult to adapt in California. So he started one of his passions, falconry, and climbing the different mountains of Yosemite. Then he realized that the pistons that climbers were using weren't good enough because it only had one single use, and they were very soft and they were not reliable. So he taught himself when he was 18, blacksmith, and developed his own pilots. These were made of iron, could be multiple used, and they were really reliable. These pistons became really popular among climbers. So Chouinard Equipments became a very successful company. But suddenly, when he had this great business going on, he realized that his so popular pistons were damaging the beautiful mountains he so much loved, because they have to be hammered to the walls, hammered to the rocks, and they were breaking the environment while he also loved this environment. So then he took one of the most difficult decisions in his life. He decided to quit producing these pistons. He decided to stop producing the most successful product of his whole company because it was not worth it. So he nearly get bankrupt, but he developed a new aluminum, soft, multiple-use piston that became really successful. This was the beginning of a brave company, which is now called Patagonia and is well known all over the world. One of the most popular companies of climbing and sports garment. He took the decision of purpose before business. And that's what made Patagonia different. All the decisions Patagonia take are 100% based to be environmentally friendly. So this is what makes the difference. It is purpose, but purpose that goes beyond business. It's a purpose that means to do that means to do an impact, that means to change the world. Or as Ernst & Young and Beacon Institute says, is an aspirational reason for being, which inspires and provides a call to action for our organization and its partners and stakeholders, and provides benefit to local and global society. This is what makes the companies of the future. Companies such as The Body Shop, TED, Google, Tesla, and Patagonia. This is what makes the difference. They have a purpose. And this also is what Salim Ismail says. Salim Ismail, founder of Singularity University and author of the book Exponential Organization, said, what are the companies of the future doing? What is that makes them unique? It is a purpose, a massive transformative purpose, a reason of being that wants to transform the world, or at least to transform an industry. For Tesla, it's accelerating the transition to transportation, to sustainable transportation. To Google, it's to organize the information of the world. For The Body Shop, it's to enrich, not to exploit. To TED, it's ideas worth spreading. And for Patagonia, it's to make their business to save the planet. So massive transformative purpose means to define a why, a reason of being. This reason of being, it's a problem you want to solve to the world. It's how you're going to solve that problem. But most important of all, it's what is the impact you want to make, which is the difference you want to make, which is why you want to change the world, what you're going to make different. So it's true. Now, future companies are looking for impact, not so much about profit. It's about impact, what they're looking for. But by looking to this impact, they're making more money. So you see, like being purpose-driven means you're going to be more profitable. And let me walk you through a handful of reasons why this is true. First of all, consumers. We are all now well-informed, coherent, and wise consumers that we want to buy products and services from companies that are doing good for our society. Many consumer research and surveys lately have shown that 79% of consumers will rather buy products from companies that have a purpose than other companies, and are willing to recommend these companies to their families, friends, even fools, to buy these products, and are willing to forgive these companies if they make mistakes. This also was seen by big global companies as Unilever. They realized that out of the portfolio, 18 brands were more successful and were growing 50% more than other brands. These brands were the purpose-sustainable brands, and they achieved 60% of the overall company growth. Other reason, it's leadership and performance. Purpose motivates the group and all the collaborators by the meaning. It enables leaders to be more successful because it gives them focus. They show them the way. Purpose is the North Star that makes you take decisions, and they don't focus in smart micromanaging. They focus in the long run, in what they want to achieve. and also facilitate and enables teamwork, because it makes individuals and teams to work in different silos up to achieve a single unique purpose, a single unique aim. Even leaders that are focused in purpose, they report that they are better adapting to the market needs, more flexible to the market, and also they grow faster than other companies that they don't. Other reason means how you attract talent. You know that in the future, with artificial intelligence, captivating human talent is going to be one of the competitive advantages for all our companies. So purpose would be one of the most attractive things to get the new talent. And this is even more important with new generations. By 2025, more than 50% of the overall workforce will be millennials. And millennials are willing to leave. 2 out of 3 millennials plan to leave your company in less than 5 years. And what does attract millennials? Millennials believe that businesses must be a force to create positive impact. So if you want to attract those and if you want to retain them, you must create an impact, a positive impact. And also, they are the generation of values, and they are willing to stay in your company if you're really making a difference, if you're really making a social and environmental impact in the world. There's also innovation and creativity. Innovation and creativity is also driven by purpose. Why? Because it gives you that bigger picture. In an everlasting, ever-changing environment, purpose is what remains. It makes you focus in the solution, not in the products, not in the step, it's in the long run. So eliminate short-termists. A clear example of this was Tesla. In 2014, Tesla decided to open the portfolio of their patents to the world, to their competitors. Say, okay, if our purpose is to accelerate the transition to sustainable transportation, let's help competitors. So we'll be faster if all of us have the same information and we are competing to make this transition. This drives innovation. So see, the other reason is legitimacy, because purpose brings together a community of stakeholders that are willing to support you, are willing to believe in you, and are willing to follow. This means that it will reduce the cost of acquisition and retention of key resources as journalists, suppliers, talent, collaborators, partners, investors. See the example of Apple. Apple creates a tribe. There are so many people willing to buy any Apple product or even to defend whatever they do. Even the craziest idea, they are there. It's a tribe. So this is something that purpose can collect for your companies, for your startups. I can tell you from my own experience. I come from a company in Paraguay, which is Koch. It's a private company that was born in 2012 with the purpose of accelerating the development of Paraguay and the Latin American region through entrepreneurship. We wanted to be an incubator and accelerator, but at that time, nobody was talking about incubation, nobody was talking about startups in Paraguay. So we started raising a community, making people talk about it. We started pushing other actors and articulating other actors to develop an ecosystem in Paraguay. If you thought it business economically wisely, it wasn't. It's like, it made no sense what we did. It didn't make sense to the business, but it worked for our purpose. So actually, we are a successful company. We grew a lot. We are making money. We are not rich. We are not making much money, but we are surviving. So I can tell from my own experience, I lived it in my own skin, that purpose is actually very profitable. It is a real reason to be profitable. So from Koch, we believe that we are the crazy ones. We are purpose entrepreneurs, the ones who want to change the world. We do things that are not easy, but we do things that are right. We are gonna make the difference.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to make the difference. We are raising an economy that makes the difference. We believe in solving social and environmental problems through the market force. We are the crazy ones. We have a purpose. We want to be the best of the world, being the best for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. So for the last 4 years, I've been investing in the female market, which is one of the most overlooked markets in the world. And it turns out that 80% of the consumers in the world are female. So if you combine the markets of India and China, you would have a smaller market than the female market. And the interesting thing about this market is that they really care about purpose. They care about the stories behind the companies and the brands. And so your advice and your perspective is very relevant for what the market is looking for today. Okay, we are approaching the end of the session, and we have, last but not least, Bridget, who's going to come and follow with the same theme of social innovation and reaching some of the world's development goals by applying social entrepreneurship. Bridget, she's an expert on philanthropy, impact investing, economic development, international aid. She's also in the board of GEN in South Africa. And let's welcome our last speaker of the session, Bridget Evans.
Which one do I push for the... Thank you. Very tough going last, but I'll do my best. So I've had in my career, I started my career off working for a foundation that gave grant funding to NGOs, many of which were trying to solve the sustainable development issues. One of the things that really began to depress me was that I did this for a number of years, and I knew that we would give them grant funding today, knowing that they were going to need money again tomorrow. And the size of the problems seemed to be getting bigger, and our ability to solve them seemed to be diminishing. And then I heard about this fantastic new idea that was being sparked called social enterprise, and its ability to solve social problems through business models in a more sustainable way. And fast forward 12 years, and for the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of running the SIB Foundation, where we invest in entrepreneurs and farmers, but one of our key focuses is on social innovation. So for the last 5 years, we've invested in 135 what we call social innovators. They're in the very early stages, so a lot of what we're seeing is very pioneering. And but what we have seen is not only growth of turnover by 130% and the creation of more than 600 jobs, but I think what's most interesting is the level of innovation and how young people are thinking so differently about solving social problems. I'm going to go through a couple of examples and then talk to you using these examples around some of the challenges experienced by these entrepreneurs and what it means to support them. So just to clarify, when I say support, I mean it's mentoring, it's business skills training, and it's funding. We do grant funding. I know some people, you know, it can be a bit controversial in these entrepreneurial and capitalist type discussions, but I'm a very firm believer in grant funding, and I'll speak to, you know, some of the unique challenges for this sector specifically, which is why I believe grant funding is so critical. So take GEC, for example. GEC comes from a rural area. In South Africa, we have a lot of rural poverty, and he moved to an urban area, studied, and now, you know, lives in Johannesburg. He really became concerned with the plight of rural subsistence farmers in South Africa. Now, in South Africa and many other African countries, cattle are seen as a sign of wealth, yet your rural farmer doesn't have access to, he has no access to a market to sell those cows. Most of them are used for special occasions and things like that, but there's no actual financial, even though it's seen as an investment, there's no actual financial value to the cattle. Take the other side of the coin, where you have a lot of people who come from rural areas, recognize cattle as a form of investment, but they're now in urban centers, and so they can't own cows. And what GEC did, which was very innovative, was connect rural subsistence farmers with urban investors who actually wanted to invest in cows. And he has created a platform where an investor can purchase a calf. The calf then gets moved to a farm where it's grass-fed, so it's organic. And he's now created a brand. The rural farmer gets a very fair price for his cow. And now so the urban guys can own cows. And at the end, when the cow goes to cow heaven, they get a very fair, they get a very good price for the meat because it's organic. The second example is Dr. William Mapham, who did his community service in a rural community hospital in South Africa. And he treated a patient there who had an eye condition, and he didn't feel that he could adequately treat this person, so he referred them to a public sector hospital. Now, the trip for that person to go to the hospital was 3 hours and a very expensive taxi ride. That person didn't make the trip, and in the end, they went blind. And this really burdened Dr. Mapham, who as a young doctor felt very inadequate in his ability to treat that. So he thought, what is a way that he can come up with that connects rural doctors to public sector hospital specialists in a way that can improve the way that people are treated and the speed at which they're treated. And he developed an app that connects, he firstly did it for ophthalmology, but now it's for multiple specializations, where the rural doctors, nurses, physiotherapists can now refer to public sector hospitals, and the public sector specialists can look at it immediately and treat. Now, he started in 2014 with a couple of doctors on there as a pilot and treated just a few hundred patients. Fast forward to 2018, and last year he treated 60,000 patients using this app. And it has revolutionized, it can be revolutionary for the public sector, because doctors, not only is this quick referral so important, and the fact that it doesn't burden the rural poor to then have to make that commute, but it also is transferring knowledge in a unique way, because rural doctors are very isolated. So, where public sector guys in big hospitals can, speak to their peers and say, hey guys, I don't know what this is. Do you have any idea? In a rural hospital, that luxury is not there. So what he's seeing now is that people are able to treat things that they weren't able to treat before. The last example is Mameza Community Safety, and Thuli was trying to solve, she lives in a township which in many cases consists of informal houses. There's a lot of poverty in those areas, and unfortunately crime is very high. Now, these people can't afford security services of any kind, so she developed a little panic button that connects households to each other. It connects them to community health forums and to the local police. So now, people who you know, have an experience of crime are able to alert their neighbors very quickly. And what has happened is that they did a study and it's brought down crime in the area where they started by 26%. And she now has 18,000 people using this panic button system. And she now has inquiries from many other countries, including India and other parts of Africa, that want to use this technology as well. So I just want to speak quickly, you know, to the wisdom of C.K. Prahalad when he wrote that seminal book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. I think in a South African context and in many developing world contexts, what you're seeing is real business opportunities solving problems in areas where there just simply haven't been goods and services before. We invest in pharmacies, the first pharmacies that are opening in township environments. We're investing in, I put there a picture of a swim school just because it's been so fascinating for me to see how many swim schools have started to open up in township environments. And I really do believe that in a developing world context, there are great business opportunities in environments where people used to see poverty, and now they see maybe lower income and people who have to make different decisions and much harder decisions around their discretionary spending. But where they see value, they're still willing to invest in goods and services. So that's been a really fascinating thing to see. So what have some of the challenges been for us? And we are the first investors in these environments. South Africa has a growing impact investing community, and it has a lot of competitions and things at the one end of the scale, but there's a huge missing middle gap in terms of funding. So we're really trying to close that gap. We've had to open a second round fund to reinvest in entrepreneurs because the funding simply wasn't there. I think some of the challenges to these business models is they're addressing market failures in many ways. You know, the runways to profitability can be very long, and you know, you have to be patient as a grant investor. You know, Dr. Will Mapham's example, he started in 2014. It was only at the end of 2018 that he got his first advertiser that was willing to now obviously because of the high volume of medical professionals using it, they want to advertise on his app. But it took him 4 years, and it was only because we really believed in it that we kept investing in him. But I mean, that would have closed if you know, he hadn't have had that funding opportunity. I think a lot of these business models need very high volumes because they're very low margin. That example that I gave of the township panic button is a classic example of that. You know, she is starting to make profit now, but it's been a very long road to get there. The big question of who pays for it, again, going back to Will Mapham's example, you know, often these social enterprise models are actually improving government service delivery in a way that you know, government hasn't been able to do. So that medical example I gave again, I mean, they're improving government efficiency. They're you know, bringing down costs dramatically of treatment, and yet the adoption by government has been very slow, and they've had to find alternative revenue sources for it. Sometimes in some of these social enterprise models, of course, you know, somebody pays for somebody else. You know, we have a lot of examples that come across our desks of people who come up with these models that think that corporate philanthropy is going to pay for another person to use it. We never accept that as a business model because it's weak. Corporate philanthropy changes its mind a lot, and it's, you know, what's sexy to fund today isn't sexy to fund tomorrow. So we really are looking for much more robust business models than that. But then government as client is something we're really working on, because obviously we need to work with government to actually help them to create ways to adopt innovation in government. I suppose it's like a big corporates as well. I heard someone earlier talking about innovation in corporates, and I think, you know, they're no different in many ways. The adoption of innovation is slow, and so we have seen, and we've working closely with government, and we are seeing opportunities open up much more, but it's been a real challenge to get this far. But having said, and the last thing is behavior change. When, particularly in very low income groups, you know, as I mentioned, they have to make very hard decisions with very limited financial resources. You know, do I fund my child's schooling this month, or do I fund food? You know, and those are very real decisions that people are having to make at that low income level. And so some of these models, a lot of these models require behavior change, and behavior change is quite difficult. I think, you know, when solar lights first came out, everyone thought, oh, you know, this is such an obvious solution for a rural household who doesn't have power. You know, they can buy these things and it'll cost them quite a lot up front, but they'll save so much money over 3 or 4 or 5 year period. But actually trying to get people to change behavior, they've been using paraffin or candles for years. But for them, a candle costs a very small amount of money, and they only have a small amount of money. So you're asking them to make this massive investment. And what we found is, you know, as obvious as it seemed to us, this was 3 years ago when we were trying this in some rural communities. Not that easy. So it costs a lot of money to change behavior in many circumstances. Having said all of this, it is just the most exciting space to be in. To see young people, millennials specifically, you know, who are actually, many of them highly educated and could potentially, you know, get very lucrative jobs in companies, actually choosing to dedicate their lives and their careers to this kind of innovation. So for us, it is really a privilege to be able to work with them. And I think the big challenge for us now is how do we scale a lot of these models, and how do we cross borders into other African countries, because there's so much of what we've done that actually is relevant to many other African countries. So I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to I know everyone's had a very long day, but I am going to end with a video of one of our other social innovations, just because I think it's really cool, and I hope you enjoy it and that it inspires you. So let's hope it plays.
Railpro is a South African company located in Olifantsfontein in Johannesburg. We make road rail vehicles. We take conventional chassis and we add a rail subassembly that allows the vehicle to run on road and rail. With the SAB Foundation grant, we propose to turn this bus into a rail bus for transporting people in rural areas as a means of cheap and convenient transport. South Africa has the world's 14th largest rail network of over 20,000 kilometers. 11,000 kilometers is electrified, and that's deemed primary line that carries over 85% of the freight in South Africa. The remaining 9,000 kilometers is deemed branch line. It's that branch line that is underutilized and could take more traffic, coupled with new technologies, especially telematics and geopositional technologies. Our rail bus will serve rural people taking rural people to local towns where they can buy provisions required to sustain them, and also connect labourers with work, women and children with healthcare and education. It will be a truly revolutionary and affordable form of transport. RailPro's technology is 100% South African, designed by South African rail engineers. We take conventional 8-ton chassis and build the sub-assemblies onto the chassis that allow the truck to drive on the rail as they do on the road. We have a totally local supply chain with the exception of the chassis cabs that are manufactured by Isuzu out of Japan. Our vehicles are up to 87% locally produced. RailPro designs its own technology. RailPro has had the technology patented globally. The technology is unlike any other technology that exists for vehicles of this kind. We have no additional engines. We simply have a transfer box that redirects power from the rubber wheels to the rail wheels. It's super efficient and allows us to get up to 6 kilometers per litre of diesel, which is twice that you would get on road. RailPro already has a fleet of about 40 vehicles serving Transnet in a maintenance capacity. The rail bus will be developed and will then run on some branch line close to Pretoria in order for us to carry out a bankable feasibility study. That study will give us two things. First of all, it will identify our standard operating procedures, how those passengers ride on the rail bus. Secondly, it will allow us to determine what the price point is, how much those clients are prepared to pay to ride the rail bus. RailPro is the only manufacturer of these road rail vehicles in Africa. The technology was designed by South Africans for South Africa. We believe our rail bus that travels on road and rail has the power to transform branch lines into highways of hope for tens of thousands of South Africans.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. We are indeed inspired, and this concludes the GEC Talks of this Congress. I want to thank you all for attending, and let's give a final thank you to all of our speakers, and I wish you a very enriching experience for the rest of the Congress. Thank you to all of the speakers. See you later.